Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's panel on AI and innovation in financial services. Canada is undoubtedly a global leader in AI, and we've witnessed significant growth, investment, and adoption across many industries from both the private and public sector. Our strengths in AI technology are certainly one of the key areas that TFI highlights in our work with other global financial centers. And we've had the pleasure actually working with many of Canada's strongest fintechs who are leaders in AI innovation. So it's safe to say the possibilities of AI application within financial services are diverse and abundant and already established. So it's really my pleasure to be moderating this discussion with two fantastic panelists. I'd like to introduce Grace Shen, the Managing Director, Head of Application Architecture with BMO Financial Group, and Shaun Gamboa, who is the Director of Machine Learning and co-lead of the Machine Learning and Data Practice at CGI. So first off, I'd like to invite you both to just give a very brief overview of your roles with your organizations, perhaps starting with Grace.
Nice to meet everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. So I'm working for the Bank of Montreal, which is one of the top banks in Canada. I'm right now working for the enterprise architecture teams, leading the application architecture. In my responsibility in the scope, I'm looking after data management and AI. So machine learning is one of the responsibilities. So today I'm very glad to join the panel and have some discussion with Shaun and with the audiences on the call.
Thank you, Grace. And over to you.
Hi, I'm to help organizations that are either on their journey or moving along their journey in machine learning to reach the targets and metrics that they set. So I lead a team of engineers and business strategists who help organizations figure out what they want to do and how they implement, and we kind of also guide them on the journey of what's the real, what's the possible, and what's the art of the possible.
Fantastic. Well, to kick off the discussion, I'd like to start with maybe one question to both of you, actually. What are some of the recent AI and innovation trends you've noticed within financial services? And of course, has the pandemic impacted some of these developments? Again, Grace, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, so that's very good questions. So pandemics is a negative thing in many people's life. But in financial services, we actually found some positive impact influences in terms of the digital transformation and platform modernization, and especially on the employee experience, workplace digitalization, those spaces. We see a digitalization and an AI technology be applied, accelerated at least. So, for example, we see the robotic process automation, RPA, be applied in the last year aggressively in the bank, trying to process the back office's capabilities. And a lot of activities in the past, people never thought how to automate it because this is a situation, unfortunate situation, enforced owners to think about how do we work differently. And another thing is our customers cannot visit the branches anymore. Then enforced the organization think about how do we engage our customer digitally. That's actually brought in a lot of AI-driven technology be rolled out in the organization. For example, the face recognitions for the onboarding experience, and also the back office using the AI-driven machine learning models to do the risk detection and the fraud monitoring. All those things is happening. And I've been working in the financial organization for many years, and I never seen such accelerations happened in the past, at least in the past 10 years. And a lot of things which is be discussed, which has not been really enabled, but last 12 to 15 months, what I have seen is very exciting. And we see a lot of emerging technology be rolled out. And AI is definitely one of the new capabilities which is helped banks to improve our customer experience and bring more digital insights.
That's great. And Shaun, maybe you have something to add?
Yeah, I agree with what Grace said. I think maybe I'll just focus on less about customer experience, because that's definitely where the large pocketbook of money that I'm seeing is being spent for sure on the customer experience side of machine learning. I also have a lot of wonderful and not so wonderful stories around fraud and banking, and I think there's an enormous amount of opportunity there that banks can kind of chase after. It's just a matter of are the understandings of fraud and are the understandings of machine learning at the level required to actually execute, because there's a lot of hype, and much like Agile before it and DevOps after that, and I'm sure quantum computing after this, there's a lot of hype in these hype cycles, and it's important to understand what's realistic, and that's kind of what we bring to the table is what can you execute, and that's what we see as what can you execute in a reasonable amount of time that actually brings business value, because technology is amazing, but technology without business imperatives is not really that amazing for anyone. No one's going to be happy if it doesn't make money in the end. So that's kind of where we try to focus ourselves, is how to bring business value to organizations that could theoretically proof of concept themselves out of any machine learning possibilities, which is what we end up seeing actually quite a lot, is POC, drop it, POC, drop it, POC, drop it, and then machine learning doesn't work for us.
Well, maybe we'll move on to some of those applications that I'd mentioned earlier. So, understanding that there are many opportunities, they're diverse. Grace, maybe you can talk about some of the specific areas of financial services that actually have the greatest opportunities or challenges in terms of adopting and innovating with AI.
Yeah, so opportunities always exist, and actually exist in many places, like including the reduced human in times to deal with a lot of long trivial works, and that actually free up our internal employees to do some more motivated, innovative, and exciting creative work, because those repeated work actually like a robotic process automation, RPA, did help us a lot in terms of back office process. Another thing is about customer insights. We don't also understand the customer, we won't be able to provide the best product services, which is our customer needs. And the interesting is with this digital, like the youngs is born in the digital generation, like they are digitalized. The past experience we've gained from the past many years in providing financial services, including marketing, including those engagement onboarding process, doesn't seem very attractive to the digital generation. So it gave us an opportunity to leverage AI to understand what our customer really needs. That insight is very interesting, that we do have some insights enabled internally. And I found which is really open everybody's mind how to sell and provide services later on. And the second is the fraud detection. I think Shaun has already mentioned. Fraud and risk management is a very big, like important focus. All banks actually it's a manage of risk. Like banking industry in general is manage all types of risk. So we also see that once we enabled a lot of fraud detective technologies, the volume of the data flowed in cannot be managed by the traditional technology anymore. We do need a powerful AI-driven technology to processing those streamed data efficiently and very properly, blocking some suspicious transaction. So some of the big projects being enabled, I mentioned last year during the pandemic, and we have already seen it's turned into a very effective result, and the outcome is very exciting. So this is the area. And last thing is I want to talk about, it is our chatbot. In the past, when we engage financial services, usually people will make a phone call and also visit branches. And recently, and very interesting, we found more and more people willing to online chat. So in the recent a few months, we have multiple chatbot projects enabled in the production. The technology itself, it's various. Some of the platform, like a cloud platform, provides some kind of chat capabilities. But some emerging technology team, like startups teams, they offer some very innovative way to how you to engage a customer and collect answers that provides the insight. So this is another very interesting space. Actually, I see the growth opportunities in the bank. There are more, which I pointed out a few.
Of course, and I was going to comment, as a millennial, I'm certainly very grateful for you know, a lot of those chatbots and digitalization that's been happening at the financial services level. Shaun, maybe it's a good opportunity then to talk about how should AI use cases be identified and evaluated within an organization?
So that's a large part of my job. Organizations, banks specifically, have so many lines of business, and they're often not connected to each other. They often don't talk to each other. They often don't realize that people next door are actually doing machine learning already, and that they've got a 3-year project already funded. They just won't even know that somehow. So the very first thing that I recommend always is find out what's happening internally, because I'm sure there's a lot of repeatable tools that you can utilize. Before you go spending, find out what's already been spent. That really is the first thing that we look for. After having done that kind of intro entrepreneurship, then look at what the other players in your field have done. But that's often kind of a trap, because keeping up with the Joneses just means you're staying the course. And so there's many other really innovative companies outside of banking that should be looked at. As an example, Netflix's chaos engineering has one with their machine learning technologies, and how they treat the infrastructure of their machine learning is a lesson that every organization can utilize, not just banks. And so we when we're doing our work for banks, we don't just look at what other banks are doing. We look at what other industries are doing, how they're doing, and what's the state of the art. But then it's a question of how do you actually find what is useful to our organization, and that is really should be a business revenue generating lines of code approach, as they say in DevOps, which is which machine learning technologies should we utilize towards which use cases, and which ones will make sense financially first, and then technology to give us a technological advantage. Because sprinkling machine learning on top of everything is a common mistake, not just the industry, and it's not the panacea. It's not the panacea that it's cracked up to be. It can be very expensive to maintain, and that's got to be one of the factors into choosing a use case, is how expensive is it to maintain. So one of the tools that we use, 2 tools mainly in our practice, which is the Plaster framework, which is a framework from NVIDIA that talks about how well a particular model will generalize for your use case from a financial and a business perspective. And then we also use the well-architected framework from Microsoft and Amazon as how to carry it out, which has 5 factors around security and optimization that are super important. And so choosing those use cases needs to be, from our perspective at least, it needs to be something that's done with a business team and with a business metrics and mindset already predetermined, and then working back from that, build really fast proof of concepts. So in our team, we build for banks proof of concepts and strategies within 12 weeks. So minimize that cost of finding out which technology is going to work by doing it in a quarter. In a quarter, you can have 3 machine learning use cases built up and created and kind of fed back into the machine of business use cases. So we've been pretty successful doing that. And so I think, maybe I'm biased, but I think that we have a good approach. And I think that using that kind of agile, lean startup approach is the one that generally works for every industry. And it's especially important in machine learning, because what we do is experimentation, and it's a science and an art. It's not like web dev. It's a little bit more complicated.
Well, maybe a follow-up question then, Shaun. Which functions and stakeholders within a financial services organization are core participants in an AI governance structure?
That's the key. The key is getting a sponsor and having them stay there and not be distracted. I can't tell you how many times I've been on a project and the whole team, everyone's ready to go, but someone didn't sign off on the data being acceptable, or some other area of interest not being ready. The security team didn't sign off on this, that, the other thing. And then everything is stalled for months, if not quarters, if not years, based on discussions that have happened but didn't get signed, that need to happen again 5, 6, 7 times. So really, it's important from the beginning in every agile approach, including those, especially those in machine learning, to ensure that you have a line of non-dependencies from the start. So have a high-level buy-in, and then make sure that every line of person down to the actual people executing and up to the people at the top, that there's an agreement upon what they're doing, and one person being the owner has been the key to success. One executive stakeholder being the owner. Now, who that is in every organization differs, and what that role is also differs. But because, again, banks are very often split by lines of business, it becomes quite easier to figure out who that person is. And then I wouldn't proceed unless you get that money agreed upon beforehand, and get that, most importantly, that sponsorship, that executive sponsorship agreed upon before you start POs, before you start running very hard forward. You know, there's some POCing that can happen up front, but if you want to bring something to production, it's not as easy as every other type of computer science. So executive sponsorship and leadership, not even just sponsorship, but leadership is really, really important. It's pretty much the key between success and failure.
Those are great insights. Maybe we'll take a bit of a turn towards the talent question. Toronto's very fortunate to have some incredible talent in financial services sector. So Grace, maybe you can share, what are your thoughts on some of the key skill sets that people require to effectively develop, adopt, or utilize AI in the financial sector?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So I want to, before I answer your question, I want to touch on what Shaun just mentioned. Apparently, there's some challenge about the data management in the bank. And what he just described is a kind of data silos, which could possibly be one of the reasons blocking the banks to adopt machine learning technology or developing the in-house developed machine learning models. This needs a lot of the effort internally to streamline the data. Just extend this topic further, right? That means we need very special skills to working in the bank to adopt AIs. So first thing, needs to be agile, flexible. I think Shaun mentioned a few times that we need to be able to be agile in order to do the machine learning development. Secondly is the time management ability, the ability to prioritize the task. Working for the bank is slightly different from working for a startup company. There are a lot of competing priorities coming on the individual. So you have to stay focused. And the third one, actually teamwork. So if you're working in a one line of business, but the initiative needs to work across in the enterprise or touch multiple points, and you definitely need to work with other teams. And how do you be a good team member is also important. So the next one I'm going to touch whether there is a program skills and the technical skills like probabilities or the statistical algorithms and big data technology skills like Spark, AWS and Azure, those kind of cloud tech platforms. Those are very important technical skills for us to be successful developing the deliverables, which is can be a model, can be a data sets or some result. But I want to emphasize is those soft skills I mentioned earlier, which are very important to be successful in the bank. Regardless of which are your role, could be the technologist, could also be the business analyst or data analyst. So working with people actually is a very important aspect for defined success. I think Shaun gave a very good insights earlier. The projects are quite complicated. Make it a success, especially trying to turn from POC to production. You're very easily going to work with more than 20 different teams. Then how do we make sure we are not blocked by the process and we are able to gain the alignment, obtain the concurrence from all stakeholders? That is the key. Then the soft skills, I emphasize again multiple times that that's very important elements for the AI stories and machine learning development in the bank.
And Shaun, I know you have a bit more of a technical background when it comes to AI. Do you have anything to add in terms of some of the skills that talent should be acquiring to be successful?
Yeah, so. I think it's a little bit counterintuitive to a certain extent in the technical aspects of it, in the sense that I have found in my career that the younger the machine learning engineer or data scientist, the more successful you're probably going to be if you have strong leadership around them. And it's not just an age thing, it's more like too much experience in the corporate world doesn't necessarily lead to a very clear understanding of what experimentation is. And what you're really doing in machine learning is you're creating a series of experimentations that need to be followed and kept steady, which is why you need leadership. But the idea that it's possible to experiment and it's allowable and that failure is a good thing, which is what is required in machine learning to be successful, is not something that someone with 15 years in the corporate world has been experiencing for the last 15 years necessarily. So I have found that having very open-minded managers and then very skilled younger people who don't know that what they don't know and don't realize that it's not possible, which is what very often we think as we like advance in our career. I think that's a key to success, and I think a lot of organizations look for 25 years of Ethereum experience when Ethereum has been existing for 5, and so that's a key mistake I find, is that people aren't willing to, not people, organizations aren't willing to invest all the time in the young energy that comes with the inexperience that requires guidance and requires mentoring and requires all those things. For me and for my dollar, if you invest $1 in a person and you get back 2, it's a no-brainer. Whereas you can also just invest the $2 in a person with 20 years experience, but then they really have to be good, And so I believe that organizations should take larger amount of bets on people with less experience and have the environment to coach them and guide them, which is what Agile and what Grace is talking about. It's what it basically comes down to, which is that coaching and mentorship environment. But it's not, again, because it's experimentation, these are not the norms of banks or manufacturing or health organizations. It's not the norm anywhere. But to actually be successful, it is what is necessary because it is science. And so I've seen, and I've done some work in pharma, and I've seen pharma companies not able to implement machine learning because they can't have science, a real science environment, which is ironic because they're science-based companies. So it's hard to expect a bank, which is not at all times a science-based company, to be successful. But where a bank should look for what is successful is they should look inside into their own high-frequency trading desks or anywhere where they do kind of any type of algorithmic trading, because that's some of the most, if not the most advanced machine learning in the world. So if your organization is using tools like Vocal Wabbit, or any of the tools that are around high frequency trading or speed and algorithmic trading, you already know what you're doing, because that's the most risk and the most reward for machine learning in any industry. And I don't think banks are necessarily looking in that location, even though it already exists very often. Last thing I'll say on that is also, there's nothing wrong with third-party providers as far as talent goes, and there's nothing wrong with third-party companies providing your machine learning, because very often banks are like, no, we're going to do it all ourselves, and other times banks are like, no, we're not doing any of it. And they often find at the end of their journey, 7-10 years in, that you kind of have to do both. You kind of have to do part of it yourself, and you kind of have to give part of it off to other organizations to handle.
Well, that's a great segue, actually, to the next question around, what are some of the particular challenges associated with adoption of third-party solutions that incorporate AI, and how do your organizations navigate this?
It's a question to me?
Sure, if you'd like to start, Grace.
Okay, I will start with it. First thing is, BMO has a lot of integration with third-party offered technologies. I actually found it's quite interesting, because that goes to, I'm working for the enterprise architecture group, so that's why we constantly run into a decision-making process trying to differentiate the capabilities in-house developed versus buy. So the decision around the buy, build, or compose a modular architectures, do a combine both, which is an art. So in terms of integration with third party, in the case, just on the topic of machine learning, BMO in general, our position is we don't think, excuse me, we don't think we can do a good job as the other high-tech companies. For example, face recognition, those kind of models. I don't think the bank has an interest to develop our own. First thing, we do not have such a volume of the data. We will trust the big tech company have existing established model we will integrate with. Some other specific model very likely will be proprietary information and belongs to risk management and some fraud detection. They will be very tied into the bank's internal process. That will be developed internally. We do have a fully enabled cloud platform, which is built on AWS, and to help us do the machine learning training. So technology-wise, in last 2 years, the bank has invested significantly on the cloud platform to help us get into the state we believe we are able to do in-house development about learning. And the data, it's something which is going on. We are trying to harden our data management, get things established. Even though we have data, we have a model, we still cannot ignore the bank is a highly regulated industry. And we have to do every steps very carefully, ensure we are compliant with the regulations requirements and the privacy challenge, especially recently the Canadian government released some bills and actions and motions trying to harden the privacy laws. So all those things are all tied into the data. So our customer in somehow the data be sitting on the core banking and other big data platform. In order to integrate third party, we have to have a level of the consensus from customer and also has some security controls and legal things. So all this putting together, that's happening. What I could ensure is the bank actually integrated with third party allowed. We have a lot of third parties integrated with the bank system right now. They, for example, the chatbot I mentioned earlier. I don't think the bank has developed any chatbot application. It's all third party integration. However, the process itself is going through a very long and restricted gating. And it's definitely a risk framework to be applied on those kind of evaluations. I will pause it here. Maybe Shaun has some other insights to share.
Maybe I'll say from the third perspective. So part of my job, I spend 2-3 hours a week listening to startups who want to get access to banks and have third-party integration. To have a footing into banks such as yourself. And because I'm a technical person, I do end up doing a lot of questioning around the technology that they're claiming, and very often it doesn't take me long to realize that the snake oil salesmanship is happening very commonly in a lot of these tools. Everyone that I know is trying to sell you the automated machine learning that's a magic wand that you do nothing and then you just give us your data and it's going to magically turn into every insight you've ever imagined in your entire life. And that's the problem with that, is it does a disservice to there's some very great startups out there that are doing amazing stuff in this space, in banking and in fraud, and ones that we partner with and ones that we get to interact with that I think are great, that we meet sometimes at the bank themselves. But it's such a complex set of skills that are required to be able to integrate anything at a bank, or for a bank to integrate within its own systems, because the systems are so incredibly complex and so incredibly regulated, as they should be, because they're dealing with our money. And no one would complain about their money being well regulated. So I don't think we're going to. So the real need for understanding what's happening in your own organization and what's happening at a third party needs to be understood before you engage in anything. And because all of this is happening on the cloud now to a certain extent, and that requires skills like Kubernetes, and just orchestration, it's just the list of skills go on and on and on. It boggles the mind how much is required to be known. So it requires people like Grace who understand the enterprise architecture level. Like, that's the key. These are the key players in the whole thing actually working. So I'd say one of the most important things into a third-party integration is you better have a very strong enterprise architecture team, or else you're in big trouble.
Well, I know we only have a couple more minutes left in the discussion today, but the topic kind of near and dear to my heart is always, the ethical principles and responsible AI. So I'm wondering if you can both share some thoughts around, what are the principles that an organization considers when assessing the ethical impact of new AI use, and what is needed to ensure responsible use of AI in financial services generally?
Yeah, so I will start. Since Shaun pointed that the enterprise architecture play a very important role on technology governance. Yes, when we have some projects brought it up for the ARB approval, we're always trying to ensure that, for example, the AR ASIC it's a laundry list, a long list of what you need to consider. First is accountability. We have to make sure it's internally there is stakeholders accountable for the outcome and the data and the result, and also privacy regulator I already mentioned. And for AI itself, right, the model itself has to be explainable and also has to have a fairness, like the human rights, all those things have to be considered. The bank, we do follow the industry best practices. Like, for example, IEEE has some certain standard about the ASIC principles. And European also has some kind of trusting human-centric artificial intelligence, those kind of standards. So Canadian government recently also published some kind of ethical design of use of automated decision systems. So all those kind of principles be embedded into the technology governance process. We do look all of them, but in terms of how much we could evaluate, that is the art. Because a lot of third-party models or in-house developed models, it definitely needs a very high skill technology backgrounds to really understand and try to give an endorsement or evaluation. But I think in terms of banks, our focus is we still in the very early stage, try to ensure our AI models, which is to be developed to follow all the ASIC principles, and especially third-party developed models, which is a black box to the bank. But in general, the fairness and the human-centric well-being, environment, and all those explainabilities, all things which is all a part of the frameworks, which are currently be conducted, carried on. I pass over to Shaun. Maybe Shaun can have other more insights.
I think we're running out of time. So I have so many things I can say about it, but my ideas are pretty controversial as far as the possibility of machine learning being fair and human beings training models that are fair. We'd have to grow fair and ethics in our own right first before we can actually make a machine do that. And so just one tiny little story is Canada is a world leader in machine learning. Canada is a world leader in machine learning and AI ethics. That still didn't stop a bunch of Canadian computer vision companies from unwillingly contributing to some pretty terrible computer vision outcomes in other parts of the world. And so it's too complicated a subject for any organization to take on themselves. This is really a global problem, I'd say.
Well, thank you so much for both of you and taking the time today and joining this panel. We will call it there so that we're not taking up too much more time. And I'd also like to thank the conference organizers very much for this wonderful event. And everyone at home, stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, Sara.
Take care. Bye now.